Yeah, we're going to head to the Middle East now in our program. Palestinians say the Israeli military has told them to evacuate several houses in a village in the occupied West Bank, where Israeli settlers trapped 2 Palestinian families in their homes since Sunday. Settlements are illegal under international law.
The army said the move was intended to protect residents of Qusra in south of Nablus. An Israeli spokesperson described the incident as deplorable, unacceptable, and said the government would investigate and arrest those responsible.
Our correspondent John Donison is in Qusra and give us the latest.
Well, quite a few developments today. So these houses, which were being besieged by settlers since Sunday, the Israeli army went in overnight with bulldozers and they demolished the sort of tent encampment that these settlers had set up outside these houses. They cut off the water and the electricity to these houses in the last few days. And the army dispersed those settlers. But a few hours later, the settlers were back milling around, and the people living in those houses, well, they've been told to move out of 2 of them and all move into a 3rd house together. So that's one thing. Here in the village of Qusra itself, the Israeli army raided this morning and they occupied these 11 or so houses behind me on the hillside, telling the families to leave and saying those buildings were needed for military purposes. And some of the families there have now been allowed to go back in, and they say their property has been badly damaged. We saw soldiers up on the rooftops. Now, we did manage to speak to one of the men who had to leave his house for, well, at least 9 or 10 hours, a man called Karir Odeh, and this is what he had to say.
I was asleep in the morning, my brother and I. They came in and broke down the door, shouting, "Open up, open the door." I asked, "Who is it?" They said, "The army." When they came into the house, I was shocked. I had just woken up. They took me inside and said, "Go in there and sit down." I sat down while they searched the house. They asked if there was anyone else in the house besides us, and I told them no. They took us inside, and honestly, I was completely surprised. I wasn't expecting it. Even now, I still can't process what I saw in front of me. There was more than 20 of them, maybe 30.
On the more broader issue of settler violence, they have been saying that in recent years it's just got significantly worse, and that is backed up by the United Nations, who say there has been a surge in settler violence. But what they say is that in the past there have been physical attacks, violence on Palestinian citizens, also the burning of Palestinian property, Palestinian farmland. But this new tactic of sort of laying siege to a property to, in effect, starve people out is very, very different. I was speaking to the mayor of Qusra yesterday, a man whose own brother and nephew were shot by settlers a couple of years ago and killed, and he said he'd never seen it as bad as it was today.
Thanks to John for that. Well, we can speak now to Arwa Damon, President and founder of INARA, International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance. Thank you for coming on the programme.
Thank you for having me.
So just first of all, your thoughts on what our correspondent John was outlining there.
I mean, the tragedy of it all is that we have been seeing a repeated cycle of violence that has been lending itself towards these kinds of actions. If you just look at the numbers, we have unprecedented numbers of attacks by settlers, of the Israeli government approving new settlements, of all sorts of violence taking place across the entire West Bank. And this does raise a number of great concerns, obviously, for the civilians who are there, the Palestinian civilians. That is because they very much feel as if all of this is being allowed to continue with a level of impunity, despite the fact that the IDF did move in against that one little sort of tented encampment of settlers. This isn't really a long-term solution. And what I think makes this all especially concerning is the Israeli government's attitude towards this to a certain degree. If we look at what Benjamin Netanyahu was saying just a few weeks ago in an interview on CNN, he said that the settler violence was basically, being carried out by teenage thugs, by gangs, which of course begs the question as to why the IDF can't actually, or is unwilling to, rein these gangs in.
So what do you make of the statements that we've had very strong condemnation from Israeli spokesperson earlier, saying that this action by the settlers was deplorable, it was unacceptable, we will investigate and arrest those responsible, but also you're outlining the encouragement or tacit encouragement from the Israeli authorities towards settlers. What is the balance here?
I mean, we've heard that kind of rhetoric before. Whenever any government official or IDF spokesperson is specifically asked about settler violence, you do hear that blanket statement of, we condemn it, we're going to be taking actions against it. But, I've been speaking to a number of people in the West Bank who I've been speaking to, on a regular basis for years right now. And those who have sons, for example, are terrified to send their boys out of the house lest they be caught up in something or accused of something that they weren't involved in. Mothers who I've been talking to repeatedly describe an atmosphere of living in entire fear and uncertainty, not knowing exactly where things are going. And so when it comes to the rhetoric that is coming from the Israeli government, there's very little stock being placed in that, especially given that we've heard this before, and all we have been seeing and all Palestinians say they are feeling on the ground is an increase in settler activity and violence and an increase in levels of impunity with which that is being permitted to take place.
And Arwa, finally, just on a practical level, what would you like to see happen now?
There's a number of things that really do need to take place. I mean, first and foremost, humanitarian organizations do need more access. Again, we just look at the numbers, for example. We do see targets against the humanitarian and health sector. In the first half of 2026, according to the United Nations, there were roughly 100 attacks on access to health. And what does that mean? That means attacks on ambulances that are critically needed to evacuate the injured. That also means that there are a number of challenges and obstacles that humanitarian actors face when trying to get assistance to the West Bank. I mean, never mind Gaza. Gaza is an entirely different, scale of blockade of access. And then we also need to see some very serious action by the international community. But the bottom line is that as long as the United States really continues to support Israel, very little is actually going to change. We're not really seeing any sort of accountability or any sort of dialing back in terms of situations on the ground, be it in the West Bank or Gaza, as long as the United States continues to stand firmly behind Israel.
Arwa Damon, thank you very much for coming on the programme.
We haven't yet heard a reaction directly from President Trump on this. The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, a long-standing supporter of settlements, called the settler intimidation of the Kuster families, quote, a horrific act of terror. And he posted on X, actions by those who carried out this horrific act of terror meant to intimidate and harass this family are disgusting and no excuse for such, quote, thuggish behavior. So let's get some first thoughts from our panel now, Abel Maldonado and Joel Rubin. Very good to have you both on the program with us today. Joel, I'll start with you. What do you make of what we're seeing here and what the reaction, or so far lack of reaction, has been from the White House?
Yeah, Sumi, it's great to be with you and with my friend Abel. And look, it's disgusting what's happening on the ground inside the West Bank. Settler violence is completely unacceptable. It's been going on for years. The Israeli government knows how to deal with it. Yair Lapid, the leader of the opposition, was just here in Washington a couple of weeks ago and gave a speech where he said that the Israeli government should deal with it right now. It wouldn't take more than a few hundred IDF soldiers to do it. So the fact that it's ongoing, that the prime minister doesn't clamp down, it's because he's afraid of his far-right base. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, the two most well-known leaders of the far-right political parties, have Netanyahu in control right now, leading into an election period, so he's not going to move. And for Israelis, and I was just there several weeks ago, many of them are actually kept in the dark. The Israeli people don't quite fully grasp what's happening on the West Bank in their name. And so there's an accounting inside Israel needs to take place. And that's where I'll take issue. I'll close with this, with what Arwa said. This is not because the United States supports Israel. This is because the Israeli government is not doing what it needs to do according to its own laws to clamp down on violence committed by settlers. And that's where the United States should weigh in. I think the ambassador was right in being firm. And I think that we have a government here that is more than capable of telling the prime minister that even if he takes some political heat at home, this is a bad move and he should be clamping down on it.
Abel, we'll get into some of those details perhaps that Joel just raised. But first of all, your thoughts on what's been happening.
Well, first of all, this is completely unacceptable. What these, as Bibi Netanyahu called them, thugs. You have Mike Huckabee, our U.S. ambassador, calling this a horrific terror act, calling these Israeli terrorists. I don't know. I understand where Joel's coming from. They are doing, and they're calling them out for who they are. This is unacceptable. They need to keep the pressure on and end this quickly. I mean, what they've done, cut food off, cut electricity off. I mean, again, these are thugs. We got, and Joel is right. I mean, BBs need to put more pressure. They've come out and they've put pressure, but they need to put more. I'm with Joel on that 100%.
But I want to ask you both about the Trump administration's role here. And Mike Huckabee, we mentioned the tweet from him there calling this a thuggish behavior. He had another tweet, if I think we have some images of this, where he says settlers are not the problem, quote, unsettlers are. And he says a very small minority who do great damage to Palestinian families and to Israel. Joel, we have mentioned that he is a clear advocate of settlers, and the Trump administration has not taken the tack the Biden administration did, which was to sanction violent settlers.
That's right. I'm glad you mentioned that. There were clear, and direct sanctions on Israeli settlers engaged in violence against Palestinians during the Biden administration. Those were taken away. I think they should be reimposed immediately by the Trump team. There's no downside risk, quite frankly, to doing that when you have someone like Mike Huckabee, who the first day when he came in to the embassy in Israel, he basically went out to the settlements. He basically is an ally of the settler movement historically in his own personal bio and background as a leading Christian Zionist. So when he says this, he's giving a lot of political cover to the White House. And also, he's very popular inside Israel, as is President Trump. And I think the Israeli people wouldn't be that upset if the extremist elements inside of Israel are held to account, and if the President Trump is pushing the Israeli government to do that.
And Abel, is there an underlying tension here, an underlying difficulty, the fact that all settlements are illegal under international law?
Look, Lewis, I mean, Ambassador Huckabee is a supporter of settlements. He's made it very clear. And as you stated earlier, I mean, what's the position of the White House? Listen to Ambassador Huckabee. That is the position of the White House. Ambassador Huckabee called these folks Israeli terrorists. I don't know what more you want from a U.S. ambassador who is in Israel talking about who these folks are. And he went on to say this is horrific terror. So I think the White House is probably hasn't said anything at this point, but listen to the ambassador who represents us. He's made it very, very clear, and I think they're doing all that they can.
Abel, Joel, great to have you with us for this hour. Plenty more from both of you in just a moment. Now, though, around the world, across the UK, this is BBC News.
Now we're staying in the Middle East. We want to bring you this story that's developing there and reverberating here in Washington.
Yeah, there are growing concerns about living conditions on a US aircraft carrier that's been deployed in the region for more than 250 days now. Reports suggest US military members aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln are living with food shortages and broken plumbing. Also reports there have been suicide attempts.
The carrier left San Diego in November for the South China Sea. It was then sent to the Middle East ahead of the attacks on Iran in February. No return date has been announced formally.
Well, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal has put an open letter to the Defence Secretary writing, quote, "The Lincoln's extended deployment raises broader questions about the Navy's ability to sustainably generate carrier forces while preserving service member well-being."
Well, we have our White House correspondent Dan Bush with us here in studio to talk a bit more about this story. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. What more is the Pentagon saying about this story?
Well, the Navy is out pushing back on this to a certain degree. In a statement to BBC, Sumi, the Navy said that it has not seen, and I'm quoting here, an increase in reported suicidal ideation or suicide attempts aboard the USS Lincoln. The Navy also went on to say that it takes the well-being of its service members very seriously. Also addressed reports of potential shortages of supplies, food, clean water, saying that none of that exists. So the Navy is downplaying this to a certain extent, but I don't know if that's going to be enough to move this story out of the headlines. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut wrote a letter to Defense Secretary Hegseth yesterday expressing serious concerns about the living conditions on board the ship. Blumenthal also noted that this particular aircraft carrier has not had a port of call in over 200 days, which according to this senator is a record. It has been deployed now for more than 250 days. So this is a lot of attention on an issue that Democrats, I think, are going to seize on and continue to press the Pentagon for more details. Some of these details are still a little unclear. There are reports that multiple sailors jumped overboard. One of them was wearing a life vest. He was rescued, and the Navy said no serious injury to that particular sailor. So we don't know some of the circumstances around this, but we do know that spouses of and family of service members aboard the Lincoln had a contentious meeting with Navy officials recently, right, where they raised a lot of these concerns.
What, if anything, does this tell us about the morale of troops as this war in Iran continues?
Well, you put it best when you said that the Army, the military said there is no return date for this aircraft carrier, right? So it speaks to the morale question, because this was a war that when it began, President Trump promised that it would be potentially over very quickly, in a matter of days, a matter of weeks. Now we are months into this conflict. There is no end in sight, and it is putting clearly an increasing strain on the military, both here officials in Washington who are trying to justify and explain this conflict, and then on the actual service members who are engaged in it. We've also seen an increase in attacks from Iran on U.S. bases in the region. Some service members have been killed in this war. So there is increasing pressure because there is no end date. And especially in this type of situation, as you can imagine, that morale is not very high when there are these concerns about shortages, about water, food, other things, and when the military is saying, we don't know how long you're going to be there for.
Okay, our Washington correspondent, Daniel Bush, thank you so much for joining us with that reporting.
And I should say, Pete Hegseth, Defence Secretary, has rejected that assessment, really, saying these reports are, quote, completely misrepresented. Right, let's bring in our panel again, Abel and Joel. Joel, let's start with you. Did you raise any eyebrows when you heard some of these details?
Goodness gracious, Lewis, how many eyebrows I have. I only have two. I wish I had more to raise than this one. You know, look, first of all, don't mess with military families. When military families are upset and angry because they're hearing from their family members who are serving our country, then you better listen. And the idea that a press release comes out and it says at the top of the Navy that we're taking this seriously, that is not going to cut it, trust me. But when it comes to the actual issue, you know, my fear is this is the tip of the spear. There are probably a lot more Lincoln stories out there than we're seeing, and this is because of the failure to plan. And I think that's the bigger picture problem with this war, is that regardless of where you are on the decision to or to not go to war, what we can all agree on at this stage is that there was inadequate planning for it, inadequate planning to anticipate that the Strait of Hormuz would be closed, inadequate diplomacy ahead of time, inadequate structure on, war off again by the commander-in-chief. He has no real theory of how to achieve victory that anyone can discern and have confidence in. And so now who's bearing the cost? Our service members who are serving on our behalf valiantly. And I just fear that this is only going to grow as a story. And ultimately, I fear this is going to cost lives at sea. And that's very damaging.
Abel, the home base for this ship, this carrier, is in San Diego, of course, where you are in California. That's where that contentious meeting, as we understood, took place between Navy officials and those family members. Do you agree with Joel that this is down to poor planning?
You know what? I don't want to get into the poor planning. I don't have the information on what was the right timing to go in. Did we go in too early? Was the planning poor? We have service members who have given their life to America, and that's the number one thing at this point in time. They've been gone. They left California in November of 2025 on their way to Asia, and all of a sudden they're in the Middle East. And like your previous panel person said, 200 days haven't been to a port, 250 days been on the ship. Look, they need all the support that they can. And I want to believe in my heart, the way you listen to President Donald J. Trump, how he talks about military family, how he talks about the military, period. I want to believe that they're doing everything that they can to help these families. Now, there's been a couple of families that have complained. Okay, if there's a lot of families that are complaining, let's get to the bottom of this ASAP, because Joel is right. This is not going to go away. These families are united. They're on the boat. They get calls from their kids. This story's not going anywhere. So Secretary Heck said, I understand what you said, but let's make sure they got everything that they need so that we can bring them home all safe.
Joel, we've only got 30 seconds left, I'm afraid, but as well as looking back at things like the planning, of course, it's a volatile, risky situation, and we don't know what happens next.
That's right. We don't. Service members serve because they believe in this country and they're patriots, and they will continue to do their duty. But we really have to make sure that here in Washington, that the people running this war are giving them the guidance and the support that they need, and truly are, and have a clear vision for how this war should be ongoing and ultimately end, and how to support these people. And it should not take the families to call and complain for these service members to be taken care of.
Joel and Abel, thank you so much. We're back in a few moments here on The Context USA. Stay with us.